Hey, welcome back to Real Takes, where we are all movie love all the time. I'm Ann Stott, and tonight we have crossed over into the time of Aries. So we follow the astrological calendar here, and there are many great Aries filmmakers, starting with Charlie Chaplin, Andrei Tarkovsky, and Akira Kurosawa, three of the greats in film history, and then David Lean, who we talked about with Brief Encounter, and Alan Pakula, who we talked about with the movie Clute. And then in more current times, Quentin Tarantino, Chloe Zhao, who just won Best Director at the Oscars last year, Suzanne Bier, and the great Nicole Holofcener, who we talked about when we looked at her film Please Give last year. So lots of interesting Aries filmmakers. Aries is a fire sign, and they're known for sort of bursts of energy, which would actually be good with the cycle of making films. Like you burst with a project and then it ends and then you go to a next project. And we will be getting into some of these Aries filmmakers over the course of the month. There are also some great Aries actors who we'll be talking about, like the legendary Bette Davis, who we'll be discussing, and also the one and only Emma Thompson. So lots of fun stuff coming up in the month of Aries. But tonight is also the Wednesday before the Oscars. And I have made this show all about films that weren't nominated for an Oscar that I liked this last year. Now, there are lots of films that I did like that were nominated for Oscars that I watched and that I will watch again. And I'm not doing some kind of gaming thing about which movies I wouldn't nominate and blah, blah, blah. It's just that the way our attention span works and the way film coverage works is that as we get toward the Oscars, discussion about films from last year narrows to just those films. And so a lot of great films go unwatched, so or not talked about as much as I would like. So I'm going to talk about some of those films tonight, and I'm going to keep it brief about each of them because I couldn't narrow my list down below 12. So here we go. And I'm doing this alphabetically backwards. Why does A always get to go first? So we're starting with the back of the alphabet. There's no like preference order here on these films. They're really different movies. I'm just going for it backwards, starting with Z, which is fun. So Zola came out last year. It was written and directed by Janixa Bravo, and it starred Taylor Page, Riley Keough, and Coleman Domingo. Zola is a movie that was based on a tweet thread by a woman who was a stripper who had gone on a road trip from Michigan to Tampa, Florida. Trudy's considering whether or not she wants a lap right now. Tampa, Florida, with a new stripper friend. So Trudy and I needed to jump in quickly. I watched an interview with Janixa Bravo, the filmmaker, the other day, and she said that she didn't like using the word stripper when she described the movie to people because the word has so much stigma around it. She doesn't have stigma around it, and I want to say I'm judgment-free about it, but she found that the second she said stripper to people, there were like all this projection going on around it, and then she describes Zola as a movie about two friends, fast friends falling out of love. And that is true. That is probably what's going on at the core of this film, but for me, one, that description does not prepare you for the ride you go on in this movie. And then two, for me, there's a deeper story here about, the culture around sex work and how to maintain agency within it, which I mention when we go back to our already scheduled programming. And the trip goes bad. Let's just say it goes bad. So it's based on a true story that was first shared in a tweet thread and then optioned and turned into a movie. And Janixa Bravo does such an incredible job shooting this movie. And there were several films about sex work last year in its various iterations, which is interesting to me. And, there's this whole overlap with promotion of sex work and social media. And so the way the film was shot, you know, there's a lot of stuff about them promoting themselves on social media, and we become the phone camera in those shots. So the audience becomes complicit in what's going on and hooked in a different way. And I mean, this story is down and dirty. It is not for the faint of heart. It gets really ugly what goes down. But this woman, this character Zola, at the center of it, played by Taylor Page, is a force, and, you know, maintains an incredible amount of agency in a really dysfunctional situation, and such smart filmmaking. So Zola. Okay, the second film is Wojnarowicz, Fuck You, You Faggot Fucker, which is a documentary about the 80s multimedia artist David Wojnarowicz. And this is an incredibly dynamic documentary. David Wojnarowicz, again, was a multimedia artist. He died of AIDS in 1992. And so this is just like a walk through 1970s and 80s downtown New York City artist, counterculture scene, and then also AIDS activism. And David Wojnarowicz saved everything, it seems. He saved his answering machine messages from people. He made cassettes of himself talking about what was going on. He made cassettes of talking with his friends. And so there's literally not a single standard interview in this documentary. They have voiceover of people they interviewed. It's directed by Chris McKim, but the film is literally like exploding with Wojnarowicz's work and his visual work, his auditory work, the essays he wrote. He took several road trips across the country that he filmed. He lived in Paris for a while. There's footage from there. You know, again, answering machine messages, footage of him making phone calls as he's dying of AIDS, like trying to get coverage. And it's just a really dynamic documentary experience, and you know, a beautiful testament to this person's life and to this moment in time when a certain kind of art was being made in New York City. And I mean, if you want to see a different New York City than the New York City now, watch this documentary, but watch it for so many reasons. Wojnarowicz, Fuck You, You Faggot Fucker. Okay. I have to jump in already because I had watched almost all the movies I wanted to watch from 2021 when I shot the main part of this video, but not quite all of them. I still had like a few more left. This was my last list. I had a much longer list. I was so behind. And I finally, just the other night, saw The Souvenir Part 2, written and directed by Joanna Hogue, starring Honor Swinton Byrne, Tilda Swinton's daughter, and Tilda Swinton. And it's really beautiful. I think you have to watch The Souvenir to fully appreciate The Souvenir Part 2, but we find our main character in The Souvenir Part 2 dealing with a loss from the first souvenir, and she's in film school and ends up building a film around this loss. So just subtle, brilliant work. The end is haunting me, literally, in this quiet, beautiful way. It sort of like floats into my consciousness several times throughout the day, each day. So The Souvenir Part 2, highly recommend. All right, back to our list. Next, we have Sweet Thing, which was nominated for a John Cassavetes Award at the Indie Spirit Awards, which is an award for a film made for under $500,000. And it's made by the filmmaker, it's written and directed by the filmmaker Alexandra Rockwell. And it stars his children, Lana Rockwell and Nico Rockwell, and then the actor Will Patton. And it's a beautiful lyrical film about a brother and a sister living in poverty with their extremely alcoholic father and negligent mother. and how they kind of escape into a fantasy world for a while. And the cinematography is really good. It's a lot of handheld stuff, so if that's hard for you, keep that in mind. There's black and white and color that are wisely employed to sort of give us different moods and feelings. And it just really touched my heart. So, sweet thing. All right. Next up is Pig, which you might have heard of, which was directed by Michael Sarowski and starred Adam Arkin, Alex Wolff, and Nicolas Cage, who became huge in the 80s, first in sort of teen movies, and then, you know, with movies like Leaving Las Vegas. And he's having a whole renaissance now. He has another movie out right now. But this film is about a truffle hunter and his pig. And at the top of the film, the pig is stolen from him. And it's clear that he lives in isolation in a cabin in the woods and doesn't talk to a lot of people. And he leaves his isolation to try to find his pig. And it takes him on a whole kind of odyssey through his past in the restaurant scene in Portland, Oregon. And by the way, this is the second movie about truffle hunting that I have watched in the last year. And I had no idea that truffle hunting was such a kind of dark underworld, but it seems that it's a dangerous business. Who knew? Anyway, we just follow Nicolas Cage and his friend Amir, who was the person buying truffles from him, as he tries to find his pig, who he loved. And through that, we get this beautiful portrait of determination and passion and grief. So I was really moved by Pig. And there's one scene in the middle of the movie that everybody talks about after they've seen it. And it's, if it doesn't hit you in the gut, I don't know what will, and I can't help you. That's all I have to say. Next up is Petite Maman, written and directed by Celine Sciamma. Now, you'll remember that we talked about Celine Sciamma a while back and we talked about her film Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which was one of my favorite movies of 2020. It came out in 2019 technically, but it was the last movie I saw in a theater before lockdown. It became instantly one of my all-time favorite films. And Celine Sciamma has followed it up with this unbelievably vulnerable, open, pure experience. Petite Maman is about a girl whose grandmother has just died, and she is with her parents staying at her grandmother's house while they clean it out. And she starts playing in the woods behind her house, and she meets a little girl, and she starts to realize that the little girl is connected to her family in some interesting ways. And it's a really quick film. It's like 80 minutes. They shot it during the pandemic with a teeny little crew and a teeny cast. And it's a little gem. It's a little gem. It's so deeply moving and about family and our childlike connections to our family that never really go away. So can't recommend Petite Maman highly enough. And this is the second time France has overlooked Celine Sciamma as their entry for the Oscars. They entered the movie Titane, which I haven't seen yet. It's gotten great reviews. It's supposedly really original, so no arguments there, but I'd love for Celine Sciamma to get some Oscar love one of these days. Okay, next up is The Nowhere Inn, which came out earlier last year, but I only heard of it recently. It's directed by Bill Benz, but it's written by and stars Carrie Brown and St. Vincent / Annie Clark. So Annie Clark is a singer-songwriter and fantastic guitar player who performs and writes under the name St. Vincent. And she and Carrie Brownstein are friends. Carrie Brownstein was part of the punk band Slater-Kinney that came out of the Northwest in the 90s. And then she became an actress, and she was in Portlandia and wrote for Portlandia. And they're friends, Carrie Brownstein and Annie Clark, who is also St. Vincent. And they wrote a faux documentary, a faux tour documentary. So we're on tour with St. Vincent / Annie, and Carrie Brownstein is directing a documentary about St. Vincent on tour. And they want sort of fun behind the scenes stuff and to kind of get a deeper sense of who Annie Clark / St. Vincent is. But it turns out it's kind of boring. Like, she works out, and then she eats vegetables, and then she does her show, and then she sleeps. And there's not much more to film. And so Carrie Brownstein is sort of pushing her to kind of reveal more, and Annie Clark starts feeling more and more insecure, and she decides to be St. Vincent all the time. And it becomes this incredible satire and exploration of, what happens when your public persona and your private identity become unbalanced. And about halfway through the film, I was like, wow, this is a great setup. This is so good. Like, how are they going to carry this through? Because it's hard, that kind of setup. Like, it's hard to write any story, but to carry that sort of setup through the end. And they really did it. And, it becomes kind of surreal and a little disturbed, nothing too crazy, but it's, it's funny, and it's this great commentary about public persona and how that can impact your own identity. So highly recommend the Nowhere Inn. All right, next up we have No Sudden Move, which is directed by the great director, one of the great directors of our time, Steven Soderbergh. It stars a couple of people he's collaborated with many times: Don Cheadle, Benicio del Toro, and then Brendan Fraser's in the film, John Hamm's in the film, Ray Liotta's in the film, Kieran Culkin's in the film, Matt Damon's in the film in an uncredited performance. So I barely even knew this movie came out. And Steven Soderbergh, is one of the greatest directors of our time. And he's just like quietly dropping movies now on streaming channels. And because our theater releases, when we're not in a pandemic, are so dominated by action movies and, sequels, like these adult, mid-level, mid-budget adult films, which is one of the ways they're talked about in Hollywood, like barely get any airtime. And so this movie is a period crime drama. Don Cheadle and Benicio del Toro are hired to do a very simple crime job that goes terribly wrong. It becomes clear they've been set up, and then they go on a journey to find out who set them up. And it's set in Detroit, and it's about the car, and it's based on a true story about the car industry and covering up information. That's all I'll say. But it's just a really tight, well put together crime drama that I got totally sucked into, completely enjoyed watching, and would have happily gone to a theater to see. And yet I sort of barely knew it came out. So I just want to give it more love because I love Steven Soderbergh, and I want people to see all his movies, and I want him to keep making movies. So No Sudden Move by Steven Soderbergh. Next up is Matrix Resurrections. Okay, I loved this Matrix movie. All right, so for those of you who don't know, the Wachowski brothers, now the Wachowski sisters, they've both transitioned, made 3 films in the late 90s and early aughts called the Matrix films. The first one was just called The Matrix, that kind of revolutionized action film that melded American action sensibilities with martial arts in an interesting way, and they totally revolutionized how fight scenes are shot. with this kind of video technique that I won't bother getting into now. So they made these 3 movies. That was that. And my understanding is that, I think, oh God, am I getting this right? Warner Brothers, who own the property, wanted to make a sequel, and Lana Wachowski decided to make it so that it wouldn't get made without them. Lily Wachowski was not involved. So Lana Wachowski wrote and directed this film, and it stars Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss, who were in the originals, and Jada Pinkett Smith, who was in the original. And then there are some new stars too. Neil Patrick Harris is in it, and Yahya Abdul-Mateen II is in it, along with a bunch of other people. And what I loved about this movie is the writing. And basically, Lana Wachowski took this story that she had created with her sister and furthered the legacy of it while completely deconstructing it at the same time, while also totally taking down our binary culture and our corporate media culture. It's like a takedown and a takedown and a furthering of legacy and a deconstructing of legacy, all in one movie. I think you can watch this movie without having seen the originals and enjoy it, but if you've seen even the first one, you don't have to see all 3, even the first one, the way she is playing with her own work and her own creation is just so much fun to watch. And the conclusion that the movie comes to that's the same and yet evolved is fantastic. So I loved Matrix Resurrections. Okay, we're in the last quarter here. The Killing of Kenneth Chamberlain was written and directed by David Medell and stars Frankie Faison, Steve O'Connell, and Enrico Natali, who also edited this film. Now, this is based on a true story about a Marine veteran in his 70s whose medical alert tag accidentally went off while he was in his sleep. And the police came at 5:30 in the morning, and at 7 o'clock, they shot him. And it's shot basically in real time. It starts when his medical alert system accidentally goes off, and it ends when he's killed. So the movie's about 80 minutes long, and I completely forgot I was watching a movie. I felt like I was watching the real thing unfold. And because he was not letting the police in his house because he didn't trust them, and he was on with his medical support people, and he also had several phone calls during this time with his son and his daughter, and I think a sibling as well. They had all this real-time recorded information about what happened and how these cops, he made it very clear he was fine. He didn't want police in his home, and they just wouldn't leave him alone, and they broke into his home and killed him. It's devastating. And it's a I was sort of not breathing and not moving the whole time I was watching the film, but at least his story has been told, and it's an incredible real-time exploration of how, one, the police should not be sent on calls like this. They're the wrong people to be doing this, and how so many members of the police are, out for a power trip and racist. So a lot of important work happening in this film, really hard to watch, but incredibly well done. The Killing of Kenneth Chamberlain. Okay, now we have A Hero, written and directed by Oscar Farhadi, starring Amir Jadida, Mohan Tanabandan, and Sahar Goldust. Now I'm worried I wrote that wrong. I'll correct myself underneath if I got it wrong. So Oscar Farhadi is one of just a great filmmaker working these days. He made A Separation, which is devastating. Iranian filmmaker, and this movie is a morality tale about a man who's in jail for a debt that he couldn't pay, and he gets out of jail on a leave, which I guess is a thing that happens in Iran. I don't really think people in jail here get leaves from jail. So he's on a 2-day leave, and he thinks he has the opportunity to pay his debt back, and instead he ends up returning money to someone that's theirs. And then his story gets manipulated by the prison for good press, and then sort of the fallout from that, and everyone is implicated in some way, and nobody's left off the hook, and you just go deeper and deeper into misunderstandings and questioning motives, and sort of following through to the end, like how many ways we can misinterpret each other. So it's a quiet, beautiful film, and I highly recommend it. Okay, almost done. 2 more. Come On, Come On, written and directed by Mike Mills, starring Joaquin Phoenix, Gabby Hoffman, and Woody Norman. So this movie is written and directed by Mike Mills. I've talked about him before with the film 20th Century Women. He also made Beginners. Those are 2 of my all-time favorite films. This is his latest release. It's about an uncle who ends up taking care of his nephew for a week or so while his sister deals with her ex-husband who's mentally ill. And while he's taking care of his nephew, he's a radio journalist, and he's interviewing children about their ideas of the future, what they see the future as being. And it's just beautiful. It's really beautiful. Someone referred to Mike Mills's films as essay films. It's a narrative that has a beginning, middle, and end, but he freely inserts quotes from different writers in the film, and kind of different perspectives in the film. And then we have this element of the radio journalism and hearing from these children about their ideas about what the future holds, which, become kind of Greek choruses to this one very personal story of an uncle and his nephew, kind of finding out who they are for a week, just finding each other. It's about how we find each other. And it's beautiful and heartfelt, and I highly recommend you see it. Okay, last one. Fake Out, not really the last one. One other movie that I've seen in the last few days that I just really loved is this new indie gay romance called Cicada, starring Matt Pfeiffer and Sheldon Brown. It was written by Matt Pfeiffer with additional story by the actor Sheldon Brown, and Matt Pfeiffer co-directed it with Kevin Mulcair. It's just a sweet little romance about 2 men sort of in their late 20s. One's bisexual, one's not out to his family, who get together and, through falling in love, have to kind of face issues in their lives and themselves in a new way. And it's really well done, beautifully shot, great little New York City romance, nice shots of the city, and really lovely acting and writing. Just really sweet movie, Cicada. Okay, last one. The Card Counter, written and directed by Paul Schrader, starring Oscar Isaac, Tiffany Haddish, and Ty Sheridan. So Paul Schrader started out as a screenwriter, and he wrote several Martin Scorsese films like Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, and The Last Temptation of Christ. He started directing as well in the late 70s. He directed American Gigolo, and he's been directing for years. But lately he's been putting out some really interesting films. He made First Reformed a couple of years ago, with Ethan Hawke, and now this is his follow-up to that. And obviously in the 70s, he wrote these films about men who are troubled and having a hard time getting along in the world. And this film is sort of about someone who's troubled and has a very violent past, went to prison, and we meet him as a professional gambler who's sort of found a way to live a very controlled, scripted life. He's found something to do that he likes. He does it in a very particular way. And then some people come into his life that sort of shake that up and bring up his past. And so, you know, it's a later life exploration of the same kind of personality he was writing about maybe in the 70s. And I don't know how Paul Schrader manages to make his movies like vibrate and hum the way they do, but they do. And I'm like all in from the start. And then not only that, we finally have Oscar Isaac like in a starring role right in front of us for the entirety of the film. And it is such a pleasure to watch him work. And there are some violent flashback sequences. They're pretty quick. They're pretty violent and disturbing. But this movie's rich and deep, and Oscar Isaac's work is so beautiful. So highly recommend. Okay, those were some unnominated films that I love this year. There are tons of other films that I love. There's some I'm going to do whole shows on, like Passing and Blue Bayou are going to be talked about in the next few months. There are lots of other films that I didn't get to here, like Together and Test Pattern and Holler are some other ones that I loved, but you know, I've already gone so long. Okay, so please see some of these movies. Give them your support and your love. They deserve it. If you've seen some of them, tell me what you think about them in the comments, and I will see you next Wednesday. Thanks for watching Real Takes. Hit the subscribe button below so the algorithms will tell you when new episodes are out. And if you want to support Real Takes, please visit my Patreon page where you can join at any tier from $2 to $100 per thing I make. The $15 tier is specifically about supporting Real Takes, and you'll get behind the scenes information and be thanked in future videos. See you next Wednesday.